Hello guys, just gonna straighten you up a minute. There we go, that's better. Right, this week's horror video is, I think I'm going to title it The Worst Parents in Britain, because these were the worst parents in Britain. I was only young when this all was found and everything happened. It is still quite, in some places, raw for some people, and in other places it's still quite it's still something that evokes like this gut-wrenching feeling in people. One of the reasons being, one of them is still alive. She's in prison. She will never be free. Thank goodness. And the other reason is it was only found, I think it was in 1995, so we're only talking 22 years ago. I was 1995, I was 13. So, and it had been happening since from the looks of it, from the 60s, like the 60s, 70s onwards. And the plain simple fact that they didn't stop some of these things, especially with how many times he was caught and just given a fine, is beyond me. But obviously it was before we got the tougher rules we now have in place, and it was before, a lot of this was before DNA evidence, and obviously DNA evidence, even compared to 95 to now, there's a big difference. When I was at university and I was studying forensics, which was like 2000, 2003, it was more sophisticated than it was when it was found in 89, but it was nowhere near to the level that it is now. At that point, it was it'd take you 2 weeks roughly to get a result back on DNA testing. Now it can take 3 or 4 days. Obviously working days when the labs are open, but still, it's still a lot quicker than it used to be. And once upon a time it was months, and the fact that this case was allowed to go on for so long, when there were near incidences of people almost finding out and people saying this is what's happening, and them just getting a fine because of, I'll get into it, but this is the story of Fred and Rose West, the worst parents in Britain. And that is saying something. Like I said, that is saying something. We've had some pretty nasty parents in this country, unfortunately. Right. Fred West, born Frederick Walter Stephen West. He was born in 1941 and he died on the 1st of January 1995. Rose West, which is the one that's still alive, was born Rosemary Pauline West. Like I said, she's still alive. I can't remember what prison she's in, but she's still alive. But she and a few other people in the country have, one of them being the Yorkshire Ripper, have Andy and Brady, who died not long ago. They have the sentence of at Her Majesty's leisure, which basically means you'll never be free because the Queen's never going to release you. Her Majesty's leisure does mean two things. One being, of course, that they're in prison. The other one is that they will not be discharged unless the Queen allows it. And in this case, I don't think the Queen's going to allow it. And I hope Charles doesn't, if he ever becomes king. I've watched a few documentaries on this case, obviously, and being somebody with the degree I've got, I did learn a lot about this. And it was, like I said, because it happened when I was like 13 years old, I was aware of it happening, but I didn't look too much into it because I was only 13 and I was at school. But as I got older, I looked more into it, and I'm not going to go into too much detail in this. If I can remember, I will link you up above the documentaries where it actually has some of the and one of them actually has the tapes of the police interrogating Fred, which is very interesting because he likes the 2 words no comment a lot. I have a quote from Fred, which is, "Yeah, see, you got the killing all wrong. No, nobody went through hell. Enjoyment turned into disaster. Well, most of it anyway." When Fred was 19, he was convicted with the molestation of a 13-year-old girl. He didn't serve any time because his doctor said he suffered from epileptic seizures. He also had a learning difficulty as well. He was sent to live with his sister for 2 years, and he was practically disowned by his family. 2 years later, the family allowed him back into the family. He also moved back to Workle March when he got back in touch with his family, where he resumed a romantic relationship with a ex called Catherine Rena Costello. That name's very important, remember that. Who had been a petty thief when they first dated, but she turned to prostitution since he'd left town. I have notes, and I do have these in chronicle order. I will also link a couple of articles down below, and if I can remember the names of a couple of books that I think are perfect for researching this case a bit further. Rena was already pregnant with a child of a Asian, in this case Pakistani, man. Rena and Fred then married. They kept the child. They explained the child's biracial appearance because they said that the child that she was originally pregnant with died during childbirth, so they adopted a child that was a half caste, and that child was named Charmaine. Another name to remember. They moved to Scotland 2 months after getting back together. Fred demanded sex, even though Rena wasn't that into sex. He definitely liked that stuff, did Fred. In July of 1964, they had their own daughter named Anne-Marie. Their life in Scotland came to an end after Fred accidentally ran over and killed a 4-year-old boy with his ice cream truck. And it is not, at this point, it is ideal to point out that at that point the accident wasn't his fault. Fred, Rena and the kids, as well as Isa McNeil, which is a nanny of the families, and Anna McFall, a friend of Rena's, moved back to Gloucestershire, which is down south somewhere, if I remember right. The marriage then fell apart between Rena and Fred. Rena returned to Scotland alone for a short while. Then she returned back to Gloucester because she missed the children. And she returned back to Gloucester in July of 1966 because she missed her kids, only to find Fred was in a relationship with McFall. In 1967, McFall became pregnant and demanded Fred divorce Rena. Fred didn't like that very much, so he killed her, dismembered her and buried her. Now this video is going to get demonetised. I'm talking about the West, what more do I expect? Rena finally left Fred a few months later, leaving him with both Charmaine and Anne-Marie. Fred is also suspected in the possible death of 15-year-old Mary Bastholm, who disappeared from a bus stop back in the 60s down in Gloucestershire. Rose. A little bit of backstory on Rose. She was abused by her father. Her mother also suffered abuse from her father. Her mother decided to leave the house. She took Rose with her, went to live with her oldest daughter, Rose's sister. Then, after a short while, Rose returned back to her father and lived with her father. There was an incestuous relationship between Rose and her father. Another point to remember. and she met Fred, I think she was about 15, 16 when she met him, and the father didn't like Fred at all. He pretty much told Rose that she was never going to be with him, blah blah blah, and she told Fred to leave Rose alone, threatening him all sorts. While Fred was in and out of jail, she fell pregnant with Heather, another name to remember, and took care of his other 2 children, Anne-Marie and Charmaine. In the summer of 19... it's also worth noting that Rose treated Charmaine and Anne-Marie with absolute disdain, as some step-parents do. In the summer of 1971, Rose snapped and killed Charmaine. Fred buried her under the kitchen floor. Now, that is something worth remembering, because I will explain that a little bit further on as to when they figured out, because at first Fred said he killed her, but he actually said no, it wasn't killed, and I'll explain that in a bit. In August of 1971, Costello disappeared when she came looking for Charmaine. She came looking for both Charmaine and Anne-Marie, but primarily Charmaine, and she went missing, essentially. Rose and Fred were married in June 29, 1972. Rose partook in prostitution, and Fred allowed this. In actual fact, he encouraged it. He would actually have like holes in the wall where he would watch, and she would videotape it and things like that. In June of 1972, they had another daughter, Mae West. The family was too big, so they moved to 25 Cromwell Street. 7 more children were born. 3 were fathered by Fred. 1 was possibly fathered by Rosie's dad, and the other 3 were mixed race, fathered by many of 3 of Rosie's clients. In October of 1972, they hired Caroline Owens, who is actually still alive. She's one of the only people that survived, as a nanny, and made sexual advances towards her. She said no repeatedly. One night in December, they both tried to seduce her. She tried to leave, only to be held captive overnight. Threatened that Fred would allow his friends to have their way with her. So she complied, and she was released the next day. Like I said, she did survive, and there is several interviews. Again, if I ever remember, I will link them up above, of interviews she's done about the case. There is actually interviews with another survivor, but Rose has actually said categorically that they had nothing to do with her. So whether that is true, we don't know. She pressed charges. Fred was able to convince the court, how the hell he was able to convince the court, I don't know, that the acts she was forced into were consensual. So the word forced and consensual. And he was fined $50 for indecent assault. £50 for indecent assault. Yes, granted, this is back in the 70s, where £50 was quite a bit of money, but still. Over the next 6 years, they killed at least 8 young women. Linda Gore, Anne-Marie Cooper, Lucy Catherine, I don't know if her name, full name, Therese, I can't pronounce that name, Shirley Hubbard, Janita Marin Mott, Shirley Ann Robinson, and Alison Chambers. Like I said, there's a couple of names there that one I haven't got the full name, and the other one I can't pronounce the second name. But in the documentaries, obviously they're going into more in-depth detail than I will be doing. And there is obviously, as there is more serial killers, a possibility for the victims. They sexually abused Anne-Marie West, which is the child of Rena and Fred. Anne-Marie did get pregnant, but the pregnancy was terminated because it was an ectopic pregnancy. they abused Heather when she after she tried to leave home, and that's Rosie's daughter, possibly fathered by her own father, and they abused Mae West, which is their first daughter. Victims were disposed of around the home, in the back garden, under the floorboards, well, not necessarily in the floorboards. Fred would always be renovating the house, so he'd make holes in the ground in the basement. Then when one of their victims died, he'd dismember them and do all sorts with them, throw them into the thing and then just pour concrete over them. They came close to being exposed in 1986 when Heather told a friend that she was being abused. But it wasn't. She was strangled in 1986 to silence her and was buried under the patio. Finally, they were exposed in May of 1992 when Fred videotaped himself raping one of his children. She told a friend, and the friend told the police. Now, that was investigated for 2 years, or near enough 2 years, and the case was starting to fall apart because they couldn't find the videotapes. However, they were talking to the children, and there was this common thing that would happen with the kids where they would say, we were told that if we misbehaved, that if we didn't behave ourselves, we'd end up under the patio with Heather. And that sort of flicked a switch with the authorities. And they started essentially pulling the house apart. Fred showed up to the police and said, you know, you're going to put my patio back together, this is ridiculous, it's just the kids being kids, you know, there's no truth to it, it's absolute rubbish. And then they found the first set of bones, and it was like, Fred confessed to the murders, all the murders, to protect Rose, and he was charged on the 13th of December 1994. He was charged with 12 murders in total, but he committed suicide on New Year's Day, 1st of the 1st, 1995. And he was cremated, and the only people who actually attended his funeral was several of his children. Rose has never confessed. She said that Fred had done it all, that it was all Fred. Now, the reason why I said to you, remember Charmaine. Now, when Charmaine died, they found her remains and several other remains in a field in Gloucestershire, if I remember rightly. And what happened was, they couldn't, because the remains were essentially skeletal, they couldn't determine a cause of time of death, obviously. And what they did is they actually got the skull of Charmaine, and they got one of the last known pictures of her. And they did what was called photographic superimposition. They still use it even now to receive a skull is that of a missing person that they sometimes use. And what they do is, essentially you've got a picture of a skull and you've got the picture in question, and you superimpose them onto each other. And you mess about with the transparency to where you get things to line up like teeth, and where the nose is, where the eyes are, where the ears are. Well, more precisely, this part of the face. You get that to fit with the skull, and if it fits. And what they figured out was that when Charmaine died, she'd had her teeth come out, and the teeth had come out after Fred had gone to prison. And by the time he got out of prison, she was dead. And the tooth came out on a couple of days after he'd gone to prison. And they had a photo of her with the missing tooth that was taken a couple of days after that. And that's how they figured it out, that Rose had killed Charmaine. And that then opened the door to Rose being convicted and charged with the other murders. She was convicted. The documentary I'm going to send you to, in that documentary, there is actually the doctor who did the superimposition, and he goes into better descriptions obviously than I can. On November the 22nd, 1995, Rose was found guilty of 10 murders and was sentenced to life in prison. The 2 murders she wasn't found guilty of were the ones that were Fred. And in 1996, the next year, 25 Cromwell Street was demolished after all the remains were found. It is worth noticing that in most of the remains, the one bit that was never ever found in quite a few of the remains was the kneecaps. There is a lot of the gore detail I'm leaving out. The documentary doesn't leave that out. It is quite interesting, is the documentary, for you to essentially see how bad these parents were. Now, in 2001, Rose actually announced that she was no longer appealing her conviction because she knew it was hurting people, especially her own kids. So it was like, right, what do we do? So eventually she went like, I'll stop appealing my conviction. So everybody was like, finally. But it's left a bad spot on Britain, obviously. It's literally, I would call them the worst parents in Britain. They are also one of the worst serial killers we've ever had. It's not, you know, we have had other serial killer couples in this country, one of the main ones, but the crimes are horrific. Like I say, I'm not going into detail about how horrific the crimes were. There is a lot in the documentary I'm going to send you to that actually tells you about the intricacies of what happened that I'm not going into, obviously. Now, in this family, because the same documentary actually interviews some of the kids of the Wests, and they actually said that they saw incest as normal, that it was normal. They thought every family did it, which is quite common in families with a high amount of incest. And it is one of the worst serial killers that I've ever read about, and I've read about a lot. Obviously, when you compare him to somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer, then yeah, there's a bit of a disconnect, because some of the stuff that Jeffrey Dahmer did was absolutely horrific. But with the West, it was just messed up as soon as, well, it was even before they met each other. It was bad, and it only got worse, and worse and worse and worse, to the point where it was like, right, yeah, this is really bad. We need to do something. But the fact that they nearly got caught several times and they didn't is beyond me. It really is beyond me. The sheer thought of these people makes my skin crawl, and it really, really freaks me out that these people were allowed to live out in the open for so long. And it's just like one of those things that you just watch it, you just look at it and you think, how can you do that to your own child? How can you kill your own child or your own stepchild? You just watch some, these two were the worst. They really were the worst. Absolutely horrific. Anyway, with that being said, I will see you over the weekend with a video with the hubby. We haven't decided what we're doing yet. Haven't decided at all. We'll figure that out. We have plenty to be getting on with. So yeah, I'm sure I can think of something. But I'm going to say goodbye for now. Stay safe, be good, have fun, and I will see you very soon.